the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out. Did you see the memo about this? Yeah.
Office Space wasn't just a comedy. It was a bomb that barely exploded, a film the studio tried to bury, and a red stapler that didn't exist until the cameras rolled. The star took a 90% pay cut. One scene was rewritten because a man died mid-take. And the printer? They really destroyed it. These are 20 weird facts about Office Space. And the bonus, a deleted scene so dark, Mike Judge locked it away and never spoke about it again. Clock in, this shift gets uncomfortable. Number 20. Mike Judge created the film to escape animation. Hell.
Times already this year. And if they do it one more time, I'm mad at here.
Would you walk us through a typical day for you? Yeah.
Mike Judge was drowning. Beavis and Butthead had made him famous and successful, but it was culling him slowly. Animation is brutal. Endless deadlines, hundreds of drawings, studio executives demanding changes to every joke. He'd spent years hunched over a desk, drawing the same stupid characters over and over, while MTV executives told him what was funny. He was burnt out, creatively exhausted, desperate for something different. The character of Milton started as an escape. Judge had worked engineering jobs before animation, soul-crushing corporate positions where he watched sad men get mistreated by clueless managers. He turned those observations into short animated films, just 4-minute sketches featuring a mumbling office worker nobody respected. MTV aired them between shows, and people responded. Not huge numbers, but enough that Fox came calling. They offered Judge a chance to make a live-action film, to direct real actors instead of drawings. The Judge jumped at it immediately. He expanded the Milton shorts into a full screenplay about corporate misery, added characters based on people he'd worked with, and pitched it as a way to process his own corporate trauma. Fox greenlit it, probably not understanding what they were actually funding. For Judge, Office Space wasn't just a movie project. It was freedom, a chance to work with humans instead of pencils, to tell stories without drawing every single frame. He later said, making the film felt like parole after years in animation prison. Number 19. The film was a box office disaster.
Got my pistol point cocked, ready to link shots non-stop.
Peter, Michael.
Office Space didn't just fail at the box office. It crashed and burned spectacularly. Fox had no idea how to market it. They didn't understand the tone, couldn't figure out who the audience was, and didn't know how to sell a comedy about corporate misery. So, they barely tried. The film opened in February 1999 in exactly 19 theaters. Not a limited release strategy, just 19 theaters, because Fox had zero confidence. No marketing campaign, no promotional push, no faith whatsoever. The opening weekend numbers were dismal. By the end of its theatrical run, Office Space had made just $10.8 million against a $10 million budget. Technically profitable, barely, but towards death in Hollywood, terms an absolute disaster. Fox pulled it from theaters quickly, wrote it off as a failed experiment, and moved on. Mike Judge watched his film die in real time. He'd poured his soul into it, fought the studio on every creative decision, and audiences simply didn't show up. Critics were mixed at best. Roger Ebert gave it a lukewarm review, saying it had funny moments but didn't add up to much. The few people who did see it in theaters loved it passionately, but they were drowned out by the overwhelming silence of everyone else staying home. Fox executives told Judge the film was too niche, too dark, too specific to disgruntled office workers. They said he'd made something unmarketable, and for a brief moment, sitting in an empty theater watching his movie played a nobody, Judge believed them. Number 18. Jennifer Aniston took a massive pay cut to do it.
Compounds the interest, right? It uses all these extra decimal places that just get rounded off.
I don't need 37 pieces of flair to do it. All right?
In 1999, Jennifer Aniston was one of the biggest stars on television. Friends were a cultural phenomenon. She was making $1 million per episode, had movie offers piling up, and could basically name her price for any project. When her agent told her Mike Judge wanted her for a small role in a low-budget office comedy, the agent laughed and said absolutely not. Aniston said she wanted to read the script. She loved it immediately. The character of Joanna wasn't huge, maybe 20 minutes of screen time, but she was real, A woman stuck in a degrading service job, forced to wear flair and smile while being treated terribly. Aniston saw herself in it, or at least saw the version of herself that could have existed if acting hadn't worked out. She called the judge directly and said she wanted the role. He was shocked. He explained the budget was tiny, they could only pay scale wages. Aniston didn't care. She took around $60,000 for the role, a 94% pay cut from her TV salary. Her agents were furious, called it career suicide, told her she was devaluing her brand. The studio thought she was insane, but Aniston knew what she was doing. She wanted to prove she could do film comedy, wanted to work with Judge, wanted to challenge herself with something grounded and real instead of another glossy Hollywood production. And she was right. Her performance is warm, funny, and completely natural. She's not Rachel Green in a restaurant uniform. She's a real person suffering through real indignities, and it showed audiences she had range beyond sitcom charm. Number 17, Ron Livingston, wasn't the first choice. For Peter...
Now I want you to relax your legs. You're beginning to feel your eyelids getting heavy.
Peter Gibbons almost had a very different face. Mike Judge wrote the character with a specific type in mind. Someone likable but defeated, handsome but invisible, smart enough to see through corporate nonsense but too passive to fight it. The studio wanted a name, someone who could help market the film. They offered the role to Ben Affleck first. He'd just done Armageddon and Good Will Hunting, was on the rise, and had box office credibility. Affleck read the script, liked it, but passed. He didn't want to play another everyman character, wanted roles with more edge. Next, they went to Matthew McConaughey. Same result. He liked the script, but didn't see himself in corporate hell, couldn't relate to the tone. The studio went through a list of rising actors, all of whom said no. Finally, they opened auditions to strangers. Ron Livingston was a working actor, mostly theater and small TV roles, nobody famous. He auditioned on a whim and didn't expect anything. But when he read Peter's lines, something clicked. He understood the character's quiet desperation, the way Peter had given up without realizing it. The judge watched the audition tape and immediately knew. Livingston wasn't trying to be funny or charming. He was just tired, genuinely exhausted by the thought of another day at Anytech. That authenticity is what made the performance work. Peter Gibbons became Livingston's defining role, the character people still quote to him decades later. And it only happened because bigger stars said no. Number 16. The red stapler didn't exist until the movie created it.
Get it as far back against that wall as possible. That would be great.
No. Excuse me. I believe you have my stapler.
One of the most iconic props in modern comedy didn't exist before Office Space created it. In the script, Milton is obsessed with his stapler. It's his one possession, the only thing in his miserable work life that belongs to him. Mike Judge wanted it to stand out visually, to be instantly recognizable on screen. But when the prop department went shopping for staplers, they had a problem. Swingline, the most recognizable stapler brand, only manufactured their products in two colors, gray and black. Boring, corporate, invisible. The judge needed something that would pop on camera, something that would become a symbol. The prop master had an idea. They bought a standard black swingline stapler and simply painted it bright red. Custom job, just for the film. Nobody thought about it twice. It was set dressing, a small detail to make Milton's desk more visually interesting. Then the film bombed, disappeared, and everyone forgot about it, until it didn't. When Office Space became a cult phenomenon through DVD and cable, something strange happened. Fans started calling Swingline, asking where they could buy red staplers. Dozens of calls became hundreds, then thousands. People wanted Milton's stapler, wanted to own that piece of corporate rebellion. Swingline executives were confused, had no idea what people were talking about. Then someone showed them the movie. They realized Office Space had accidentally created demand for a product that didn't exist. So, in 2002, Swingline started manufacturing red staplers specifically because of the film. They became one of the company's best-selling items, moving millions of units, all because a prop master grabbed a paintbrush. Number 15. Stephen Root improvised, most of Milton's muttering.
I'm gonna have to ask you to go ahead and move your desk again, so...
Milton's barely audible complaints weren't in the script. Not really. Mike Judge wrote the character with fragments, suggestions of what Milton might say, but he knew the real comedy lived in the mumbling, in the things you almost couldn't hear. He cast Stephen Root specifically because Root was a master of character work, could disappear into weird roles and find truth in absurdity. On set, Judge gave Root an unusual direction. Don't just say the lines, mutter constantly, complain under your breath, create a whole world of grievances that the camera might not even catch. Root took it seriously, maybe too seriously. He showed up with notebooks filled with backstory, Milton's history at Initech, his lost promotions, his stolen desk moves, every indignity spanning decades. Between takes, Root would stay in character, mumbling to himself about things that had nothing to do with the scene. The sound department went insane trying to capture it all. Root would improvise dozens of variations for every moment. One line in the script became 20 different complaints, each one sadder and funnier than the last. Judge kept the cameras rolling, let Root spiral into Milton's misery, and used the best takes. Most of what made it into the film wasn't scripted. It was Root channeling every ignored, disrespected employee he'd ever seen. The squirrel comment, the cake complaints, the mumbled threats about burning the building, all improvised. Root created an entire human being from fragments and rage. He gave Milton a soul, and that soul was furious and broken, and somehow still hoping someone would just listen. Number 14, the printer destruction scene was completely real.
I think it's lucky I'm not armed. Piece of shit.
The most cathartic moment in Office Space, the scene where Peter, Michael, and Samir take a malfunctioning printer to an empty field and beat it to death with baseball bats, wasn't faked. No special effects, no breakaway props, no movie magic. They took a real printer, drove it to a real field in Austin, and destroyed it while cameras rolled. Mike Judge wanted it authentic, wanted the audience to feel the genuine release of violence against a machine that represents every technical frustration they'd ever experienced. The props department bought several identical printers as backups, but Judge wanted to try doing it in one take if possible. The cast, Ron Livingston, David Herman, and AJ Naidu, were instructed to really hit it. Don't fake the swings. Actually destroy this thing. They were nervous at first, worried about looking stupid or getting hurt. Then they started swinging, and something shifted. The anger became real. Every frozen computer, every error message, every piece of technology that had failed them personally went into those swings. They beat that printer into pieces, plastic and metal flying everywhere, the soundtrack blaring, and it felt incredible. The catharsis wasn't acted. It was a genuine release. Judge filmed it from multiple angles with several cameras because he knew they wouldn't get a second chance. When they finished, the printer was completely obliterated, and the cast was breathing hard, laughing, almost crying. They'd tapped into something real. That scene became iconic because audiences felt the same release watching it. It wasn't a comedy anymore, it was therapy. Number 13, Mike Judge fought Fox. Over every creative decision.
Take care of the cockroach problem we've been having in here.
No, that's really not my job, and I haven't received.
People in this world that don't have to put up with all this shit. Like that guy that invented the pet rock.
Making Office Space was a war. Fox executives didn't understand the script, didn't trust Mike Judge's vision, and wanted to change everything. From the first day of pre-production, they pushed back. The biggest fight was over Milton. Studio executives watched early cuts and said he had to go. Cut him entirely. They thought he was too weird, too dark, not funny enough. They argued the movie was about Peter, and Milton was a distraction from the main story. The judge refused. He explained that Milton was the heart of the film, the endpoint of corporate abuse. What happens when you ignore someone long enough? The executives didn't care. They wanted him gone. Judge threatened to quit. He said if they cut Milton, they could finish the movie themselves and put someone else's name on it. The standoff lasted weeks. Finally, Fox backed down but demanded other changes. They wanted a happier ending, wanted Peter and Joanna to get married or something definitive. Judge said no. They wanted more jokes explained, wanted characters to spell out what was funny. Judge refused every note. They wanted to cut the Ghetto Boys track from the printer scene, said it was too aggressive, didn't fit. Judge fought for it, threatened to use temp music in perpetuity if they didn't clear the song. By the end of production, Judge and Fox weren't speaking directly. Everything went through intermediaries. The executives thought he was difficult and ungrateful. Judge thought they were trying to destroy his film. He barely maintained creative control by being more stubborn than they were willing to fight. And that stubbornness saved the movie. Number 12. The TPS reports were intentionally meaningless.
Yeah, you apparently didn't put one of the new cover sheets on your TPS reports.
Right, so there's 3 more people we can easily lose.
For 25 years, fans have debated what TPS stands for: Testing Procedure Specification, Technical Processing System, Transaction Processing Standards. Mike Judge has been asked in hundreds of interviews, at Q&A sessions, in random encounters on the street, and his answer never changes. It doesn't stand for anything. There is no answer because that's the entire point. Corporate America is filled with acronyms that sound important but mean absolutely nothing. Meetings about reports nobody reads. Forms that get filed and forgotten. Processes that exist only to justify other processes. Judge wrote TPS reports as the perfect symbol of meaningless bureaucracy. Something that sounds official, that people take seriously, that generates multiple memos and confrontations, but ultimately doesn't matter at all. Bill Lumbergh asking about TPS report cover sheets is the distillation of every pointless micromanagement moment in corporate history. The joke only works if TPS is meaningless. If it actually stood for something specific, it would become about that thing instead of about the absurdity of corporate language itself. But fans can't accept it. They need it to mean something, need the world to make sense. So they keep asking, keep theorizing, keep creating elaborate explanations. Judge finds it hilarious and frustrating. He's said repeatedly in interviews that the desperate need for TPS to have meaning proves his point. People have been so conditioned by corporate culture that they can't accept meaninglessness even in fiction. They need the acronym to be real because admitting it's nothing forces them to wonder how many real acronyms at their actual jobs are equally hollow. Number 11. The hypnotherapy scene was rewritten during filming.
Single day that you see me, that's on the worst day of my life.
What about today?
The original script had Peter's transformation happen differently. He goes to a hypnotherapist, gets put under, receives suggestions about relaxation and not caring about work stress, then wakes up changed. Simple, straightforward, nothing unusual. But during rehearsals, Mike Judge realized it wasn't funny enough. The scene felt like a setup without a punchline. There needed to be something more absurd, something that explained why Peter stayed in his relaxed state permanently, instead of snapping out of it after the session. Judge had an idea that seemed crazy, but might work. What if the hypnotherapist died mid-session? Just dropped dead from a heart attack while Peter was under, never bringing him out of the trance? He pitched it to the cast and crew. Some people loved it immediately. Others thought it was too dark, too weird, and would call the comedy momentum. Judge decided to shoot it both ways. They filmed the original version as written, then tried the death version. When they watched playback, the choice was obvious. The hypnotherapist dying elevated everything. It made Peter's transformation accidental rather than intentional, made his blissful indifference darker and funnier. It explained why he never snapped back to normal, why he stayed permanently relaxed even as his life fell apart. They rewrote additional dialogue on set, added the moment where Peter just steps over the body and leaves. The absurdity of it, the casual acceptance of death followed by complete apathy, became the key to understanding Peter's entire arc. Number 10. Initech was filmed in a real abandoned office building. The soulless, fluorescent-lit hellscape of Initech wasn't built on a soundstage. Mike Judge didn't want sets that looked like movie versions of offices. He wanted the real thing, complete with buzzing overhead lights, beige cubicle walls, and that specific depressing energy that only comes from actual corporate spaces. Location scouts searched Austin for weeks, looking at active office buildings that might rent out space. But every location had problems. Active businesses couldn't shut down for filming. Empty buildings had been stripped of furniture and fixtures. Nothing felt right until they found it. An abandoned office complex in Austin that had recently been vacated by a tech company that went under. It was perfect in the worst way possible. The fluorescent lighting was still installed and working. The cubicles were still there, arranged in that maze-like configuration that destroys souls. The beige carpet, the drop ceiling tiles, the conference rooms with whiteboards still showing old meeting notes. Everything was intact. The production moved in and barely changed anything. They added Initech signage, placed a few props, but the bones of the space were already exactly what Judge had written. The cast said walking onto that set felt immediately depressing. The lighting gave everyone headaches. The cubicles were claustrophobic. The air smelled stale and recycled. It wasn't movie magic. It was real corporate misery captured on film. Ron Livingston later joked that filming there made him understand Peter's desperation on a cellular level. Every day felt like showing up to a real job he hated, and that authenticity bled into every frame. You can feel the weight of that space, the way it crushes creativity and hope just by existing. Number 9, the soundtrack saved the film's legacy. Mike Judge is obsessive about music. He spent months selecting every song for Office Space, fought the studio for music budget, and personally cleared tracks he knew would cost significant money. Fox executives thought he was wasting resources. They wanted generic comedy music, cheap instrumental tracks that wouldn't distract from the jokes. Judge knew better. He understood that the right music could transform scenes from funny to iconic. The biggest fight was over the Ghetto Boys. The printer destruction scene was originally scored with something safe, probably rock or instrumental. Judge wanted Still, a hip-hop track about violence and rebellion that had nothing to do with office work on the surface, but everything to do with it underneath. The studio said absolutely not. Too aggressive, too urban, wouldn't connect with the target audience. Judge argued that the disconnect was the point. 3 white-collar workers channeling gangster rage against a machine. The juxtaposition made it funnier and more cathartic. He threatened to use temp music forever if they didn't clear the track. Fox eventually caved, but cut the music budget elsewhere. Judge also personally selected the Scarface samples, the Ice Cube tracks, and every piece of music that gave the film its edge. He knew the soundtrack would live beyond the theatrical release, and would become something people quoted and shared. He was right. The Office Space soundtrack became legendary, introduced hip-hop to audiences who'd never listened to it, created iconic music moments that define the film's legacy. Years later, the Ghetto Boys said Still got a second life because of that printer scene. Judge didn't just make a comedy, he made a cultural artifact, and the music was half the reason why. Number 8, Diedrich Batter's performance was based on real co-workers.
I'll tell you what I do, man. 2 chicks at the same time, man. Doesn't that chick look like Ann?
Yeah, a little bit.
Lawrence wasn't in the original script, not fully formed anyway. Mike Judge had a vague idea about a neighbor character who represented freedom from corporate life, but he hadn't fleshed it out. Then he cast Diedrich Bader, a character actor with perfect comedic timing and a face that could sell any weird choice. Bader showed up for his first day and asked Judge who Lawrence was, what his deal was. Judge told him the truth. Lawrence was based on construction workers and blue-collar guys Judge had known over the years. Men who looked at his corporate job and openly mocked it, who couldn't understand why anyone would choose cubicles over physical work. Bader loved it immediately. He added his own observations, guys he'd worked with during odd jobs between acting gigs. The beer drinking, the advice about doing nothing, the entire philosophy of checking out and being happy, that came from real conversations. The character's wisdom wasn't scripted wisdom. It was the kind of thing actual construction workers said to Judge when he was suffering through engineering jobs. They'd see him stressed and exhausted and ask why he didn't just quit, find something simple, stop caring so much. Lawrence became the voice of that alternative path, the guy who opted out of the system entirely and found peace. Bader played him with complete sincerity. No winking at the camera, no indication that Lawrence was a joke. He's genuinely happy, genuinely wise in his own way, and that's what makes the character work. He's not a punchline. He's a legitimate alternative to Peter's misery, and the film respects that. Bader improvised most of his dialogue, riffing on themes Judge gave him, and created one of the most quoted characters in the movie. Number 7, the tchotchkes scenes made restaurant employees walk out.
And I,
We need to talk about your flair.
Really? If you want me to wear 37 pieces of flair like your pretty boy over there, Brian.
When Fox held test screenings, something unexpected happened during the tchotchkes scenes. People walked out, not because the scenes were bad, because they were too accurate, too painful. Several audience members who worked in restaurants, particularly chain restaurants with uniform policies and flair requirements, couldn't handle watching Joanna get humiliated by her manager. They saw themselves on screen, saw conversations they had actually had, saw the passive-aggressive corporate speak used to dress up cruelty as coaching. One woman told the exit interviewer she'd been fired from Bennigan's for refusing to wear enough flair, and watching that scene triggered something she couldn't sit through. Mike Judge based the tchotchkes scenes on real restaurant culture in the 90s. Places like TGI Fridays, Applebee's, restaurants that demanded personality and enthusiasm from minimum wage workers and measured it in pins and buttons. The minimum flair argument wasn't exaggerated comedy. It was real corporate logic that Judge had witnessed and heard about from friends in the service industry. If you want me to wear more flair, make the minimum higher. The circular reasoning, the manager's inability to just say what he means, the way Joanna gets punished for following the stated rules, all of it was documented reality. The studio initially worried the walkouts meant the scenes didn't work, but Judge understood. They worked too well. The humor came from recognition. And for people living that reality daily, recognition wasn't funny, it was triggering. He refused to cut or soften the scenes. If they made restaurant workers uncomfortable, good. That meant he'd captured something true about how those businesses treat their employees. Number 6. Gary Cole made Lumbergh, a villain without raising his voice.
What's happening? I'm gonna need you.
Bill, Lumbergh never yells, never loses his temper, never shows genuine emotion beyond mild disappointment. And somehow, he became one of the most hated movie bosses in cinema history. Gary Cole made that happen through a masterclass in passive-aggressive performance. When Mike Judge offered him the role, Cole's first question was about tone. How angry should Lumbergh be? How much does he hate his employees? Judge's answer changed everything. He doesn't hate them. He doesn't think about them enough to hate them. They're just resources to manage. Cole understood immediately. Lumbergh was more terrifying than a screaming boss because he was emotionally absent, going through corporate motions without any human connection. Cole decided Lumbergh would never raise his voice, never break his calm monotone, never acknowledge that anything was actually wrong. The coffee mug, the suspenders, the speech pattern, all choices Cole made to create maximum irritation through politeness. He watched real managers, studied corporate training videos, absorbed that specific brand of enforced cheerfulness that masks complete indifference. Every line delivery was calculated to be just friendly enough that you couldn't complain, but condescending enough to make you furious. The "I'm gonna need you to come in on Saturday" scene is a masterpiece of passive aggression. Lumbergh frames it as a question, but delivers it as an order, adds personal details to fake intimacy, then walks away before Peter can object. Cole never broke character, never gave Lumbergh a moment of humanity or self-awareness. He created a villain who calls souls through middle management speak and a coffee mug, and audiences hated him more than movie villains who actually murder people. Number 5. Fox tried to bury the film after poor test screenings.
Crumb snatching, coochie eating pranksters. When the Grim Reaper steps up, what the hell you gonna do?
The test screenings were a disaster. Fox brought in focus groups, showed them Office Space, and waited for laughs that never came. Audiences sat in uncomfortable silence. A few chuckles, scattered laughs, but mostly quiet. When the lights came up, the feedback cards were brutal. Didn't get it. Too depressing. Where were the jokes? Didn't understand what it was trying to be. Studio executives read the responses and panicked. They'd greenlit a comedy that apparently wasn't funny. Mike Judge tried to explain that the humor was subtle, it's observational, that it would find its audience. But Fox had data, numbers, proof that audiences didn't respond. Internal memos started circulating about cutting losses, dumping the movie quietly, moving on. Marketing had no idea how to sell it. Was it a workplace comedy? A heist film? A romance? It didn't fit any clear category. The trailer they cut made it look generic and unfunny. Test audiences for the trailer scored even worse than the film itself. Fox executives made a decision. Release it in minimal theaters with minimal advertising. Don't waste money promoting something nobody wants. They slotted it for a February release. The dumping ground for film studios have no confidence in. They printed exactly 19 copies for theatrical distribution. For comparison, wide releases open in 3,000 theaters. Office Space got 19. Fox essentially buried it, hoping it would disappear quietly and they could write off the loss on their taxes. They'd given up completely. They had no idea that DVD and cable would resurrect it, that the film would find its audience without their help. Number 4, DVD and cable turned it into a phenomenon.
Date instead of 4, so like 98 instead of 1998.
Office Space died in theaters in February 1999. By March, it was gone. Mike Judge thought his film career was over before it started. Fox wrote it off as a loss and moved on to other projects. Then something strange started happening. Comedy Central acquired cable rights for cheap, threw Office Space into their rotation, and started playing it constantly. Late nights, weekends, multiple times per week. College students caught it by accident, watched it all the way through, and told their friends. The film started building an audience through repetition and word of mouth. Meanwhile, DVD was becoming the dominant home video format, and Office Space hit shelves at exactly the right moment. People who'd missed it in theaters bought the DVD, watched it repeatedly, memorized lines. It became required viewing in dorm rooms across America. Every college student working a soul-crushing part-time job saw themselves on screen. Every recent graduate trapped in their first corporate position found validation in Peter's misery. Within 2 years of its theatrical failure, Office Space had sold over 6 million DVD copies. It was playing constantly on cable, getting discovered by new audiences every single day. By 2002, it had made more money on home video than most theatrical hits made in their entire runs. Fox executives who'd buried the film watched in disbelief as it became a cultural phenomenon without their help. Mike Judge went from failed director to cult hero. The film that nobody wanted to see in theaters became something people watched dozens of times at home. It found its audience, just not in the way anyone expected. Sometimes the best revenge is living well on Comedy Central at 2 in the morning. Number 3, the film actually changed corporate culture.
We're trying to get a feel for how people spend their day at work. So, if you would...
Is that Smakowski? What's he doing?
Office Space wasn't just entertainment. It became a mirror that forced companies to see their own absurdity. Within a few years of the film's cult success, something unprecedented started happening. Corporations were watching Office Space and recognizing themselves. Some companies screened it in management training and used clips to illustrate toxic workplace behaviors. HR departments pointed to Bill Lumbergh's as an example of how not to manage. The TPS report scenes became shorthand for unnecessary bureaucracy. Some progressive companies actually changed policies after employees compared their workplaces to Initech. They eliminated pointless reports, reduced unnecessary meetings, and stopped micromanaging cover sheets. But other companies doubled down, completely missing the point. They added more team-building exercises, more mandatory fun, more flair. They became parodies of themselves while thinking they were improving. Consulting firms started using Office Space references in their presentations, explaining to clients why their corporate culture resembled a comedy about miserable employees. The film became a diagnostic tool. Mike Judge later said he heard from multiple people who'd quit jobs after watching Office Space, who'd realized their own lives had become a joke. They saw themselves as Peter or Milton and decided to change course. The red stapler became a symbol of workplace rebellion. Employees bought them as quiet protests, placed them on desks as signals to coworkers who understood. Office Space created a shared language for workplace dissatisfaction, gave people permission to acknowledge that corporate culture was absurd and soul-crushing. It didn't fix corporate America, but it made people feel less alone in their misery. And sometimes, that's enough to spark real change. Number 2, Mike Judge. based it on his own engineering jobs.
After lunch, too. I'd say in a given week, I probably only do about 15 minutes of real, actual...
I need you to go ahead and come in on Sunday, too, okay?
Before Beavis and Butthead, before animation, before any success, Mike Judge was Peter Gibbons. He worked soul-crushing engineering jobs in the late 80s, sitting in cubicles, writing code, attending pointless meetings, watching his life disappear under fluorescent lights. He had a degree in physics from UC San Diego, got hired by various tech companies, and slowly realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The work was boring, the management was incompetent, the office politics were unbearable. He watched coworkers get mistreated, saw people's spirits break over stolen staplers and moved desks, witnessed the slow corporate torture that turns humans into defeated automatons. Every detail in Office Space came from those experiences. The TPS reports were real or close enough. Actual meaningless paperwork he'd been forced to complete. The meetings about meetings happened constantly. The birthday cakes for people nobody liked, the layoffs announced by strangers, the printers that never worked, all documented reality. Milton was based on a real coworker Judge watched get mistreated for years. A quiet man nobody respected, whose desk kept getting moved, who muttered complaints nobody heard. Judge never learned what happened to him. The man just disappeared one day, and nobody seemed to notice or care. Peter's desperation was Judge's own. The fantasy of not caring, of showing up and doing nothing, of telling managers the truth about their idiotic requests, that was pure wish fulfillment. Judge quit engineering, taught himself animation, and spent years processing his corporate trauma through cartoons. Office Space was personal therapy disguised as comedy. Every frame carries the weight of someone who lived it and barely survived. Number 1, the embezzlement plot was based on a real scheme.
I got something for your mind, your body, and your soul.
The central crime in Office Space, the virus that skims fractions of pennies from transactions, wasn't invented by screenwriters. It was a real embezzlement scheme that Mike Judge read about in the early 90s. A programmer at a financial company had created nearly identical code, rounding errors that deposited fractions of cents into a personal account. Individually meaningless, but across millions of transactions, real money accumulated quickly. The scheme worked for months before an audit caught it. The programmer went to prison, but the elegance of the crime stuck with Judge. It was perfect for Office Space because it represented the ultimate corporate revenge, using the company's own systems and indifference against itself. Judge modified it for the film, made the execution simpler and the discovery more dramatic, but the core concept remained real. After the film's release, security experts said the scheme was technically possible, but harder to execute than the movie made it look. Banks and financial institutions added new safeguards specifically to prevent Office Space-style attacks. The film had accidentally created a blueprint that criminals studied. Several real embezzlement attempts in the early 2000s referenced Office Space directly. Prosecutors mentioned it in court cases. IT security training included clips from the film as cautionary examples. Judge later said he worried he'd inspired actual crimes by depicting the scheme so clearly. But he also argued that if the system was that easy to exploit, maybe it deserved to be exploited. The fact that fraction of a penny schemes had existed before his film and continued after proved the point. Corporate systems were vulnerable because they prioritized profit over security, complexity over common sense. Office Space didn't create the problem. It just showed everyone where to look. Office Space didn't follow the formula. It bombed, got buried, then clawed its way back through DVD players and cable reruns. Because sometimes the best movies are the ones studios try to kill.